Hey Leroy, how's it going? Yeah, I'm trying this new thing. Overtraining. Really pushing it. I'm just rinsing out the games. But you're still making games, right? Course. Yeah, that's just called training. What? Nothing. Preach! Testify! Overtraining is when your performance decreases from the training that you're doing. Basically, you train harder and you get worse. A million YouTube years ago, Mike Rashid said overtraining was good for you, but he just meant training. But calling training overtraining is like snorting Canderel before your workout and calling it booger sugar. You might think you're being accurate, but that's not really what that term means. When we do anything, there's a neural, musculoskeletal, and endochronological component to it. Any of these three systems individually, and sometimes all three together, can suffer from overtraining. Now, the nervous system tends to become overtrained from intensity, not volume. The musculoskeletal system can become overtrained through either intensity or volume, and you know that as injury. The endochronological system can become overtrained through volume, so things like adrenal fatigue and thyroid dysfunction. Now, the term overtraining isn't used to describe 2 and 3, but it's the same mechanism and principle. Ultimately, though, I understand what Mike was saying, and anyway, his surname's Rashid, not Webster. In bodybuilding, he observed that overtraining city is normally so far away from where most people live, which is undertraining town, that they might as well just book themselves a ticket to the big smoke, because then they might actually get to Trainingville. If you're at -1, then the way to get to 0 is to go in with the mentality that you're going to overtrain, which is +1. It's a spectrum. He's talking about the psychology of pushing yourself rather than the physiological state itself. You've got to get overload to adapt. Well, I'm going to start overloading the overload. As a former pro boxer, he's used to a high workload, and as a power bodybuilder in the aesthetic game, he's making that work for him. And presumably, he's just commenting on his experience that newcomers in bodybuilding need to consider upping their output. Now, another place that overtraining's had a total makeover is with squat every day, or SED. Nobody calls it SED. John Bros, the Vegas-based trainer, defends the concept of daily squatting to a functional max by saying, if you were told that you had to put 100 pounds on your squat in 3 months, well, they'd kill your family. Would you squat once a week? Depends which runs in the family. It's emotive. It appeals to that fear that drives us. Batman. And so at a gut level, it makes sense. But it doesn't mean that that's the reason why it works. And his critics have got a greater fear of overtraining. What it doesn't mention, though, is that John Bros believes that squatting doesn't put a large strain on the nervous system. So even squatting every day to a functional max won't break you neurally.
It won't break me.
He does believe that deadlifts are a huge neural strain, and so he recommends doing them far less frequently. What Mr. Bros is actually relying on is the valid point that squatting is a pattern and a skill, and the perfect practice of any skill will improve it. When you squat every day, even to a functional max, it's less about the intensity and volume and more about repetitively exposing yourself to the timing of the firing and the coordination of the movements under those loads. You're basically signing up for a semester at squat school. And the C.T. Fletcher tells a story about how he trained bicep curls every day for 18 months. Now, there's no skill to bicep curls, but yet this was extremely effective for him. In that case, the neural cost of that exercise is like pennies on the pound. Muscle size is a workload issue, and so he took his emotional drive to be the biggest guy on the block and channeled that into some remarkable results. But this is where overtraining becomes a little bit more complicated. You see, the load and circumstances that cause one person's overtraining aren't the same for another. Basically, one man's load is another man's gravestone. CT was world champion, and therefore, by definition, he was an outlier. He was unusual. So let's forget about squats and curls for a second, and let's think about your life. You got a busy job, difficult boss, long commute, kids, studies you're trying to do, diet you're trying to follow. These are all stresses and stimuluses. Tudor Bomper, the Mac Daddy of periodization and general athletics training, defines overtraining as
the merging of stress factors, both physical and psychological, will lead the athlete to enter in a situation where he cannot recover from training sessions.
So, is overtraining good, necessary, or even helpful? If you define it by the scientific definition, then absolutely not. No matter if you're just trying to finish that project at work, trying to look after your kids, or you're Jack Bauer training to save your family. Why? Because if you can't recover, then your performance goes down. Then the project doesn't get finished, you're raising hoodlums, and your nearest and dearest are getting gunned down in the living room. But, as Bros mentions, the intensity, volume and frequency required to produce overtraining differs from exercise to exercise. And this is where athletics fits in. Yeah, it's about time. I was wondering when you're going to get to the real athletes. Shock jumps. Sprinting is neural. It's less like squats, more like deadlifts. And if you self-identify as an athlete, then you've already committed to 4 to 5 training sessions a week minimum. Couple of track sessions, some weight sessions, plyos, drills, and probably a whole lot more. And as said athlete, you're vaguely aware of the term overtraining, but you're not too concerned about it. And there are times that you even suspect that you are overtraining. Like when you wake up sore and battered in the morning, or you're just not feeling up for it when you're resting between sets, but you push on. You know why? Because pushing on and pushing through is what got you your initial gains in the first place. And so now, you think that's the way it's got to be. I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. But as an anaerobic athlete, if you're only vaguely aware, you're going to get bit. Because overtraining is like Sabretooth. He starts out like your brother and your brother in arms, progressive overload, helping you out. But then he gets a bit wilder, becomes overreaching. And finally, he's fully untamed, overtraining. So you need to be able to sniff him out, because he is real. He's hiding and waiting. And in track and field, he will attack. I hope this helps. Bust me a thumbs up, because let me tell you something. Bustin' makes me feel good. Yap away in the comments, babe. If you like my vibe, please subscribe. Woo!